Ditto is not a good Pokemon. Its entire existence is to show off a fun gimmick that exists in the Pokemon games, and also to world build around a much cooler Pokemon in the first generation. But for some reason, whenever a metagame becomes too frightening, quite frankly, broken, behind the Pokemon Dynamaxing and the Kaijus, or a certain Paradox Pokemon outspeeding even Scarfers and one-shotting everything, there always seems to be sightings of a mysterious, smiling, dopey face in the background. So if Ditto is so terrible, then how can it even exist in the same tier as these game-breaking monsters that would later be banned? Well, to find out why this keeps happening, we're going to go over Ditto's abysmal competitive history in conventional metagames, and then we're going to go over the chaotic metagames it seems to have absurdly high usage in both singles and VGC. But first, be viable in broken metagames yourself by empowering your health, because this video is sponsored by AG1. Look, I'll admit, sometimes I get so engrossed in work that I don't think about the nutritional value of my meals. I worry if I'm getting enough of my daily required vitamins and minerals to be a healthy person. Well, thanks to AG1, I don't have to worry about that anymore. AG1 is a foundational nutrition supplement that is super easy to make. Just pour the powder into your shaker, shake it up, and enjoy. In my opinion, it definitely tastes better than a lot of protein shakes that I've had, and it feels good to know that you're covered with your dailies. AG1 provides you with all your daily vitamins and nutrients from whole foods, as well as probiotics that diversify your gut microbiome. These vitamins also promote your immune system by providing antioxidants like zinc and citrus bioflavonoids. AG1's welcome box includes a BPA and phthalate-free pouch to keep your 30-day supply of AG1 fresh, a shaker bottle, a usable stainless steel canister to house your AG1 in the fridge after you make it, a scoop, vitamin D3 and K2 drops, and some AG1 travel packs so you can stay on top of your good habits even while on the go. So what are you waiting for? If you want to empower your nutrients and also support the channel to help us create more content, head to my link in the description below to get your free welcome kit with your first subscription. This includes 5 extra travel packs, a bottle of AG1's vitamin D3K2, the shaker bottle, and more. And thank you so much to AG1 for sponsoring this video. As stated before, historically, Ditto has not been good. You can learn all about it in this video. And that's honestly to be expected, because Ditto is more like a function or a tech demo. You know, like Wii Sports or 1-2 Switch, which wasn't free with the Switch, by the way. The whole point of these games is just to demonstrate the functionality of their respective consoles and how they work. It has terrible stats across the board, presumably because it's going to spend most of its time as other Pokemon. Its only attack is Transform, which lets it copy the current stats except HP and the moves of the Pokemon. In any other competitive game, if your ability is just to copy things from your opponent, it's usually not good because it's too situational and is usually a waste of time, which is precisely why Ditto was terrible. If I may copy something that BKC wrote in our previous Ditto video, quote, "Ditto is situational if the situation is your opponent being dumb," end quote, because that's the only way you're going to be able to transform into something good. Up until Gen 5, you had to spend a turn transforming, in which case your opponent gets to do any number of things, ranging from simply boosting their stats or even pivoting into something you don't want to transform into. Then even when it got the imposter ability that let it transform on switching, Ditto still wasn't used very much. Imposter still had a limitation aside from, you know, being attached to Ditto. Imposter can't copy a Pokemon behind a substitute. Its main thing is that once the other player sees it in the team preview, they know they can't just run away with the sweep. Sure, it still had a role on bulky teams to stop hyper offense from running them over, but is still placed in the bottom tier of NU. Fast forward to Gen 8, a generation that introduced heavy duty boots. Well, Ditto always runs Choice Scarf because you want to be able to beat the boosted Pokemon you're copying, so pivoting Ditto is difficult because it's weak to every entry hazard. You can just never use it until it's time to revenge kill, but then you're basically only using 5 Pokemon to pivot around with. So yes, Ditto has all of these debilitating weaknesses, but the quote-unquote balanced metagames aren't the ones Ditto really appears in. Now let's take a look at the broken metagames it finds itself in, starting with singles. It was the dawn of Sword and Shield, and people couldn't wait to try out new toys. The Dynamax mechanic was running rampant as people were finding all sorts of ways to abuse the new max move. Every max move either caused a stat boost to the user or drop to the opponent. Because of this, insane sets such as Max Airstream Moxie Gyarados quickly shot up in usage, as every time Gyarados used Max Airstream, it would get a speed boost, and if it managed to KO a Pokemon, it would would also get an attack boost via Moxie, effectively giving it a Dragon Dance while also attacking. Tack on Max moves also not being able to miss, and Gyarados had all of the coverage it wanted with Max Rainfall, Max Overgirl, and Max Airstream, and you've got yourself one of the most insta-GG scenarios there is, assuming the opponent couldn't also do it back to you. This was just one example too. There were other Dynamax abusers. In fact, the only way to even catch up to that many boosts was to use Choice Scarf Ditto. Since Ditto also copies stat boost when it transforms, Ditto with the Choice Scarf could copy the stats and boosts of the Dynamax Pokemon and always outspeed it thanks to the Choice Scarf. Ditto would then Dynamax itself once it copies the Dynamax boosted opponent and then reverse sweep. As a neat little bonus, since transforming overrides any stat drops that Ditto might have taken before it transforms, like say from Sticky Web, Ditto isn't even affected by the Sticky Web speed drop. Thanks to Ditto, players at least had to be wary of when to use their Dynamax since Dynamax only lasted 3 turns. Lots of games boiled down to just figuring out when to Dynamax to win the game or to stop your opponent from running you over. In fact, Ditto was such a necessity that it even became the most used Pokemon on the ladder. For almost a whole month of Dynamax, Ditto was there to clean up. Eventually, Dynamax was banned and Ditto's usage dropped like a rock. In OU anyway. In Ubers, Ditto still had a legitimate role. It is often described as the ultimate revenge killer because it can simply become the overpowered monsters that ruled the tier, such as Zacian Crown, before it was banned from Ubers, and Caloric Shadow. But Ditto isn't the first bad Pokemon to have a random niche in Ubers, and this is where we see the value of Ditto in these chaotic metagames versus more quote-unquote balanced ones. Basically, when a set of few broken mons dominate the tier, and by few we really do mean literally 3 or less, there's little point to doing anything else besides trying to counter them, and thus random Pokemon find a niche. Ditto is actually not the first time this concept has come into play over Pokemon's double-decade lifespan. Past examples that come to mind are Gen 4 Uber Ariados, whose only purpose is to annoy lead Deoxys Speed, Rabombi and its Sticky Web, who, funnily enough, is banned from U Ubers, but allowed in regular Ubers because its usage is too high in Ubers, being a top 10 Pokemon there. And of course, there's Unaware Quagsire, who seemed to be the only thing that could slow Zacian Crown down before it was banned. Yeah, not really. But Ditto is a more interesting case because, well, for one, it's been around longer, and two, the power level in which it resides in is so astronomically high. So there you have it. Ditto is just one of those weird hyper-specific counters to extremely broken Pokemon because there's no point in trying to fight anything else. That's the end of the video. But what if I told you? Not exactly. Ditto has appeared in quote-unquote calmer metagames. Well, it's OU, but calm is relative when compared to stuff like Zacian Crown. Though Ditto is at its peak by far in these metagames so overwhelmingly broken, and players struggle to make any sense of the chaos flying around, much less find stability in it, this does not mean it is a hard and fast rule that is strictly relegated to them. Its usage goes down the more the metagame stabilizes, yes, and it makes sense when there aren't broken monstrosities running around, or especially combinations of monstrosities that become collectively broken through their pairing, then you have less need to go all perfect blue and copy your opponent's threat to turn it against them, because it will generally be more manageable. However, at times, these metagames will still have threats capable of spiraling out of control, and thus teams looking to stabilize their defensive core can make effective use of it, both to stabilize themselves and as a flexible quote-unquote break glass in case of emergency tool. For example, in Generation 5, when Sand Rush Excadrill was allowed and used on rain teams to give an advantage over sand, certain bulky sand teams usually terrorized by Excadrill could use Scarf Ditto as a completely unique Pokemon, a Scarfer that could revenge kill the usual suspects of Volcarona, Dragonite, and what have you, as well as also outspeeding Drill under sand. Gen 6 balance teams could also make use of it once in a blue moon. The non-broken metagame Ditto really shined in though was Generation 7 OU, which had several threats considered borderline broken that never wound up being banned. And Ditto was a tremendous catch-all. It was good against the riskier hyper-offense teams that more traditional balance structures struggled to contain. It was effective at helping balance teams dance around something like Swords Dance Kartana and Mega Mawile to put them into nasty catch-22 situation. You generally like to boost so as to actually break through such teams, but you better be able to withstand those boosts yourself because Ditto would throw them right back in your face. Have fun with your super boosted Kartana. Hope you can handle that same Kartana yourself. Oh, you're running an offense team that couldn't possibly tank such hits? And therein lies the strength of Ditto, being able to weaponize the opponent's greatest weapon. And well, if you didn't boost to the point where Ditto could reverse sweep you, you probably weren't going to break through the core Ditto was supporting, at least not nearly as easily. Ditto wasn't just good at thwarting offense either, as it was particularly particularly excellent against stall teams. Wait, what? Oh yeah, it had all sorts of neat application. For instance, it could copy an opponent's Chansey and use its heal bell for its own team. But Ditto's main role, which was particularly important, was being able to outstall teams with their own tactics. It did this by copying Regenerator from opposing Pokemon, and in conjunction with the Regenerator on its own team, be it Toxapex, Tornadus Therian, Amoonguss, or Slowbro, it could play the long game against them, simply by switching back and forth infinitely. All that was required was to not get ravaged by hazards, which was a requirement anyway. This let them stall these teams out, especially since Ditto didn't have to just swish, but could also attack when needed, as it had infinite PP by virtue of copying the opponent's moveset freshly each time it switched in. However, even in the generally balanced metagame that is Gen 7 OU, where Ditto sees regular use, it was still at its most popular by far during that period of instability, where the player base was struggling to find ways to deal with the massive slew of threats running around, the standard and offbeat alike. Ditto took them all on, and with its talents received a massive surge in usage and success, chalking up an incredible win rate. It shut down so many cheesy strategies, as well as the more straightforward ones, with such precision and reliability, it earned itself the nickname the Invalidator. Cool as that is, it has been a while since the metagame settled, and thus Ditto's days of widespread invalidation are behind it. It's solid for sure, definitely at its best, but the concept remains illustrated by the fact that its usage has dwindled as the metagame was less panicky and looking for catch-all fixes. But overall, Ditto is a conceptually terrific Pokemon, but generally it shines during periods of chaos. And wouldn't you know it, this maxim also holds true for Ditto in VGC. In fact, Ditto's VGC history might highlight Ditto's ideal habitat even better than in singles. You might be aware that VGC format shifts from year to year. Typically, each generation of Pokemon has had 1 year with only regional dex Pokemon allowed, a second year opened up to the national dex, but with really strong box legendaries and Pokemon on their level still disallowed, and then a final third year with those aforementioned restricted Pokemon being fair game. Recently, VGC hasn't quite followed that same structure, but in general, this is how it goes. Here's the thing though, while Ubers and singles might open up the field for you to make a team that totally consists of your broken Kyogres and Zacians and Calyrexes, VGC restricted metas typically only allow you to have a limited amount of those Pokemon, most often only 2, and it's in those metagames, the ones with an especially huge power disparity between Pokemon, that Ditto finds success. This shouldn't be that surprising. Let's use some really oversimplified math to visualize this. Let's say that normal Pokemon, the non-restricted, are worth 1 point, but your restricted Pokemon, your Xerneas, Rayquaza, Lunala, Calyrex, Zacian, are so powerful, so game warping, that they're worth 2 points. Now in non-restricted formats, everyone's teams would be worth 6 points, right? And you bring 4 of those to each battle every time. The power budget for each player is identical, and now the beautiful and complex matter of how you've allocated those points comes into play. Now we play Pokemon, cool, but in a restricted meta, everyone's team is worth a total of 8 points. 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 2 plus 2. That doesn't seem like a big difference, right? Well, then we get down to the choices for each battle. Restricted metas offer a chance for disparity in power budget. If one player brings both restricted Pokemon and the other brings none, you've got 6 versus 4 points, a full 50% more. Now think if one of those Pokemon is a Ditto and it copies your opponent's Groudon. What was a 1 point slot has suddenly become a 2 pointer, and moreover, giving you information on one of your opponent's most powerful Pokemon. Obviously, this is a gross oversimplification. There are times it totally makes sense to leave a restricted Pokemon behind, and some quote-unquote regular Pokemon can certainly contend with the restricted. Hell, Incineroar could basically be 1.5 points just on its own. The most simple version of saying this is, VGC restricted formats uniquely force Pokemon at completely different power levels to play against each other. Ditto is a way to get one more of these mons at a higher level. Now, from everything I've said, you might think that Ditto would just be standard in restricted formats, but that's nowhere close to the case. Ditto can be way harder to make work in VGC for 2 different reasons. First, its role as a revenge killer is much less valuable. In singles, Ditto can take someone's boost, threaten a reverse sweep, take them out, and let a more defensive mon come back in so it can do the whole thing all over again. But VGC is a much faster metagame, with less time for opponents to set up and way less time for Ditto to switch out and reset its choice lock. The second reason is that Ditto is less consistent in how it transforms. Firstly, you don't know what 4 Pokemon your opponent might bring. You can guess, but until you see what they have, your Ditto is an uninformed blob. You can't be confident in how you'll use it. Second, and probably the most important reason in this entire explanation, in doubles, Ditto's transformation is dependent on positioning. Ditto always copies the Pokemon directly across from it, but choosing Ditto's slot is a luxury you don't always have simply because of KOs and other board positioning. If I have a really important Pokemon on my side, I don't want to switch out, but it's directly across from the Mon I want to copy, well, I'm just out of luck at that point. Using Ditto well requires a high level of board positioning that can be disrupted by something as simple as your opponent switching which side of the field their leads are on. Oh, and lastly, Trick Room makes Ditto pretty useless, and it's way more prevalent in VGC. With all that said, Ditto still finds use, and it's almost only in these restricted metagames. Ditto first found widespread popularity in 2016, the first modern restricted meta, where players like Mark Duell and Luis Lopez used it to place highly in national championships. The restricted meta left, and so did Ditto, until exactly 3 years later when it cropped up on a host of teams once again as the restricted Pokemon returned. Gabriel Agati even placed 10th at Worlds with Ditto, and a few players such as Forrest Aurelian and Emilio Forbes won regional level events. Imagine copying your opponent's Geomancy Xerneas just as your own Xerneas set up too, or sniping a Kangaskhan's power-up punches. What a rush! And as 2019 came to an end, Ditto did too, until of course 3 years later again, where it reared its pink blobby head, if it has that, once again. Ditto doesn't have tremendous results in VGC, and it's by no means a metagame defining Pokemon the way it has been in certain eras of singles, but the fact that it only showed up in restricted metas is proof positive of our thesis here. Ditto thrives when things are broken. Restricted metas are literally competitively sanctioned brokenness, where a third of your team is just on a completely different power level. Of course they're where Ditto does best. Well, usually it's a third of your team. Ditto has actually seen some resurgence off of its 3-year cycle recently, and that's because Regulation G, the current VGC format, is the rarely seen single restricted format. Single restricted is a format that's sometimes disparaged because it tends to be even more centralized around those one-time exceptions to what Pokemon are allowed. Ditto has an even harder task of copying the right Pokemon, but if it does, you nominally get a bigger power increase. Let's look at our mathematical models again, even if they're a bit silly. In normal restricted formats, a perfectly played Ditto bumps your chosen 4's point value to 7 against your opponent's 6, 116% of their power. In single restricted, that value would be 6 against their 5, 120% of their power. Again, all of this math is kind of silly and oversimplified, but you can understand the principle. Your one restricted slot becomes more valuable, so cheating your way to another is a huge boon. Ditto isn't exactly taking over the meta, but it's oozing in through the cracks at top 8s. At the 2024 Los Angeles Regionals, Justin Burns placed top 8 by pairing Ditto with Caloric's Ice Rider, giving the slow horse a very speedy partner to mess with opposing fast strategies. Then in Indianapolis, Aaron Traylor used Ditto alongside Miraidon, a move he said was inspired by Gabriel Agati's 2019 team. Both these Dittos could copy opposing Caloric's shadows and blast them with their own astral barrages. That said, Rajan Ball won the whole tournament with the exact same team, but with Ogerpon Cornerstone over Ditto. But Justin proved Ditto's worth again at the North American Internationals, copying opponents' restricted Pokemon and occasionally blessing us with the first natural occurrence of the long-rumored triple Iron Hands. That's a Ditto-only tech. Unfortunately, those Ditto fans hoping for it to make its first ever top 8 at Worlds were disappointed. Only Grant Weldon was able to bring Ditto the top cut, where he finished 21st. With the shift to a no legendary or paradox format, Ditto's been relegated back to the meme tier for the time being, but savvy competitors know that dual restricted format is soon to come. So maybe Ditto can finally prove that old saying true: if you can't beat them, become them. So to answer the question, why does Ditto only see high usage when the metagame is broken? Well, let's think back to why Ditto isn't seen in more diverse and balanced metagames, such as, well, basically every other tier. Ditto is technically the best revenge killer, at least one-on-one, because what's better than just being a faster version of your opponent's buffed out sweeper? Well, that's the thing, it's good one-on-one. Ditto doesn't do anything else besides revenge kill, and PP stall technically because of infinite transforms, but is usually more seen when offense is out of hand. If the offense is manageable in a metagame, metagame, then other Pokemon who can do way more things than just transform are more than enough to handle those sweepers. And if that's the case, it's hard to justify a team slot for Ditto since it can only do that one role. But in those very overpowered metas, where once the Pokemon get their boost, basically nothing can stop it, it doesn't matter what the other 1,000 plus Pokemon can do. All of their options essentially become null and void because they simply don't have the stats to take a hit from, let's say, a boosted Zacian Crown or a Dynamax boosted Gyarados, and so on. There's a reason why these mons are so strong that a tier was made above what was thought to be the ban list. They are so strong that there is no point to having all of these things if it all gets demolished by simply clicking Behemoth Blade. No other Pokemon besides themselves can stop them. So what better way to ensure you don't instantly get obliterated than by using a Pokemon that can copy the most broken Pokemon of all time? When you've suffered severe team damage from a sweeper, call Ditto Insurance. Thanks for watching, everyone. And as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content. And in the comments, I want to know, what do you think about the video? Do you agree with our thesis? Whatever it is, let us know in the comments. Also, thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos. And thank you to everyone else watching as well. And thank you so much to our Platinum patrons. Thank you to Alex Sable, Anthony Belval Renault, Bingleton, Daniel Isbeast, Dr. Mint, Funky, Glitcherton, Gustavo, Howl, Nurse Jake, Jack G, Lord of the Rabbit, Pretzel SP, Raven Daytona Ring, Ray Ray, Skylaria, Soares and Croxon, Shiwei Miji, Stoneface Colin, and Quetzalcoatl Northropi for their major support of our videos. And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.